Bob from Oregon's Constant Gardener. It's the OCGFAM show. Welcome. We got a guest, Forrest. Forrest and your team of pros downstairs have been working on the compost tea questions, because we did the compost tea. I did the basics. I just took a couple of these things and some nectar and brewed it up. But people were like, let's get a little more into it. So I got some questions. I guess one of the first things was time and temperature, how those affect the brewing process.
Absolutely. So there's a couple different temperatures and times depending on what kind of compost tea you're wanting to make. So essentially, if it's a higher temperature, it's going to take a less amount of time for the brew to actually happen. And so for a colder temperature, it's actually going to extend the lifetime of that brew. And so if you're about 65 to about 75 degrees, that's going to be about a 24-hour brew. In comparison to anything that's 75 to 85, it's going to be anywhere between 8 and about 14 hours to be able to brew to its completion.
So I guess it would be the environmental concerns of where I'm doing it and how. Are you talking about the water temperature?
Yeah, the water temperature.
So I've never seen water 85 degrees except in the bathtub. Would you actually heat it up somehow?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's different types of like aquarium heaters or other heaters that you can add into your reservoir that will get it to that proper temperature, so that it will happen in a faster rate. As well as you also want to understand if your reservoir is outside during the winter time versus it being the summertime, that can also be effectual to how long the tea will brew.
Are there any advantages to using the heat other than it goes quicker?
Yeah, because some people want to be able to get more bacterially dominated versus more fungally dominated teas, and so the temperature and how long you brew will determine what will be more populations of bacteria or fungus.
Okay. Well, let's talk about that then. So bacteria versus fungi. Why?
Well, basically, it depends on what kind of plants that you're using your compost tea for. Bacterially dominated are more for annual plants, things that grow only for one season and then die off, whereas things that like redwood trees that last for many years want more fungally dominated teas or fungally dominated soils. So depending on what kind of plant that you're working with will ultimately determine how long and what kind of tea that you want to use.
Okay, well, some of our crops, though, are actually perennial, but we use them as annuals, because we do one and done kind of situation.
Well, the cool part is that you can have a blend of the two. So depending on what kind of ingredients that you use and how long and what kind of temperature it is will determine a blend or which one's more dominated.
Okay, so if I was a plant that classically in the wild might be perennial or would die off because of a freeze, but kind of like peppers where they can grow forever, but a lot of the time you go with the season, when you get to the end of the season, you just let them go and you go. So for that kind of situation, peppers or another crop, would I want to be bacterial or fungally?
I've heard for the most part you want to be mostly bacterially dominated, but it's still good to have some fungus in there. So it's nice to have that blend, especially for plants that, can be considered perennial or they can be used as an annual. So it's a blend.
I gotcha. So like anything, a little bit of everything. And so would you say like using, even like if you're using some of these things, a lot of times people will use SLF or they'll use Mammoth Peter. So a more diverse type of a bacterial thing is going to be more valuable than just...
Absolutely, and that also is a determining factor as well as what kind of compost that you use. Like what we have right here is steer compost, so depending on what the cows themselves ingest and that they excrete out the end is going to determine what kind of bacteria is going to be present in your compost tea.
Well, let's get into that then. What are the basic ingredients of a tea? And we're talking a microbial tea, not where we make compost out in our yard. We'll talk about that another time. But where we're buying products where someone else has composted those for us. What are the basics?
So the absolute basics that you're going to need is going to be a compost of some kind, which we have steer compost right here. Worm castings are also great as well because they have a diverse bacterial and fungal additives as well. And then a humus source that's going to have some kind of humic acid, which we currently have Alaskan Magic, which is a great humic source.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you want to have your sugar content. This is going to be your carbohydrates, which is just your unsulfured molasses.
This is the food to get the whole microbe thing going. So
absolutely.
The being in the water and then having this and the aeration is what starts that process and starts building on it.
Absolutely.
And then heat can add to that. So that's the basic thing. Now, when I did it, I just did the worm castings and I did the humus. And then I also used some Zeus juice to kind of boost that up.
Yeah, and Zeus juice is kind of like that humic acid. So like how we have the Alaskan Magic, Zeus juice is going to have that humic acid additive as well. So you can definitely substitute Zeus juice.
Not unlike how we might use cultured tea, cultured biologics tea to ramp the process up, just like the heat. They're all things you can do to make it multiply quicker and more prodigiously.
And that's the cool part about Cultured, is that they've worked together to be able to specify what kind of microbials they want to add that work the best with nectar. In comparison to just any kind of compost tea, you're kind of getting a mix of everything, and you're not necessarily sure what you're getting, but that's the great part about the Cultured Biologics, is that you know specifically what kind of bacterials you're adding into your tea.
And then they've built it based on a nectar regimen.
Yep.
I've got this sheet here somewhere, but they have like a kind of a little recipe for how you do it, which is cool. So okay, so we're moving right along. So I see you got some other stuff here. So these are your basics. I'm assuming these are some more advanced type things.
Yeah, from there,
what do you got?
Basically, you can kind of add on from that point out of just the basics of your compost tea. Soluble seaweed is always a great additive. It has a high potassium intake, as well as you're going to be getting your B1s in there.
Okay.
So that's also similar to the Zeus juice, where you're going to be getting that kelp product in there.
Okay.
As well as we also have insect frass. Insect frass is just like the carcasses of insects. So you're actually going to be getting chitin in here, which is kind of the same material that bark on trees makes it really hard. And so people like to add this into their compost tea to add that extra rigidity, kind of similar to silica, how people would add silica.
So this would be a situation where I'm trying to make the walls of my my plant's exterior mechanically less able to be invaded by insects.
Absolutely. It makes it more rigid. You know, the cell walls of the cells themselves will be stronger, harder for, invasive things.
So it's a suit of armor for the plant, but it's also strengthened from swaying and things like that when I get heavy fruit production, heavy flowers on there. So good. Now what about this Bokashi? What's the story there?
Bokashi is a really great additive as well. I'm sure that some people have heard of labs or lactic acid bacteria.
Yeah.
So essentially that's what's in Bokashi, is it's inoculated oat bran with labs, which are effective microorganisms that break down organic matter. So basically adding this into your compost, if you add any kind of amendments into your soil before you do any planting, this is going to help make those amendments more available quicker. It's essentially the same kind of end result that you're wanting from compost tea, but this just kind of gives it that boost. It gives it that extra amount to be able to break down all of those organics and really make them to those high amount of nutrients that your plant's wanting.
Okay, so is this more like this or more like this?
I would say it's kind of more like this in the sense that the microbes that are in here are doing a similar job as the labs, but this is more particular towards decomposition, the actual breaking down, being able to fully compost it. So there's similar effects, but like Cultured, it's essentially doing a more particular objective.
Okay, so it is somewhat an accelerant of food to the bacteria in there.
Yes.
But much more so than that. It is about breaking down everything and making that a more productive tea.
Yep.
Okay, so I recognize this stuff. Azomite.
Azomite.
It's like limestone or something?
It's similar to volcanic ash, is from my understanding. So basically, this has a lot of micronutrients in it, whereas we talk a lot about nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, which are the macronutrients. They are the nutrients that the plant takes up most of the time, whereas this is a lot of micronutrients, which is like your copper, your zinc, your iron, nickel, all those other elements that are not necessarily as important, still important to the process of the plant, but it's not the macronutrients. So this is a great thing to add, because you might not necessarily be getting a high amount of micronutrients from your compost or your worm castings, because it highly depends on what plants that they're eating or what you're composting.
More general, more specific.
Absolutely.
You can live off this, not this, but boy, this in addition to that is much more healthier to your plant. So this is nutrition to your plant. The minerals that you might not, the more rare minerals that are not found so much in nature because of our soil breaking down and those sorts of things, and the things that probably are sinking down through the soil with irrigation and stuff.
Yep.
Okay, so this is like making back in the day stuff.
Absolutely.
Well, cool. I think we probably covered pretty much everything. I think we should come back with another video and talk about how you can kind of make some of this stuff yourself. But, boy, oh boy, this sure makes it easy.
All right.
Awesome. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
For more information about anything on today's show, go to our website, OCGFAM.com. It'll be fun. The OCGFAM Show, it's pretty good. It happens every day. It's the OCGFAM Show. See you tomorrow.